We've all met them. That person that speaks like experts, argues like authorities, and walks into every room like they own the truth. But give them 5 minutes, and it's clear. They have no clue what they're talking about. They don't just get it wrong. They don't even know what they don't know. And the scariest part? They think they're right. Absolutely, unshakably right. So how does someone become so confident and so wrong at the same time? What's behind all that confidence when they clearly have no clue? Why do the least informed people often sound the most certain? To answer that, we need to go back over 20 years to a study that shook the foundations of how we understand human thinking. In 1999, 2 social psychologists, David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger, published research that revealed something unsettling. There's a mental glitch wired into the human brain, a cognitive blind spot that causes people to overrate their own abilities, precisely because they don't know enough to realize how little they actually know. This distortion would come to be known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And here's the paradox. Those who know the least often think they know the most, and those who truly understand a subject, they're the ones most likely to doubt themselves. As David Dunning famously put it, the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is, you don't know you're in the Dunning-Kruger Club. Today, we're going deep into this psychological trap. We'll break down how it works, where it shows up, why you might be affected without knowing it, and how to climb out. Because recognizing this bias in others is easy. Seeing it in yourself, that's the real challenge. But to understand how this effect was discovered, we need to start with a man who robbed a bank using lemon juice. Yes, lemon juice. In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler walked into 2 banks in Pittsburgh in broad daylight, robbed them without a mask, and calmly walked out. When police arrested him that same night, he was stunned, not angry, confused. "But I wore the juice," he said. He had rubbed lemon juice on his face, genuinely believing it would make him invisible to security cameras. Why? Because he'd heard lemon juice could be used as invisible ink. His logic, if it hides words on paper, surely it hides faces in real life. He was wrong, obviously, but what fascinated psychologist David Dunning wasn't the robbery. It was the absolute confidence behind it. How could someone be so wrong and yet so sure? That question launched Dunning into a collaboration with graduate student Dunning-Kruger. Together, they designed an experiment to find out just how common this kind of mental blind spot really is. In a series of studies, participants were tested on their abilities in grammar, logical reasoning, and even humor. Afterward, each person had to estimate how well they did compared to others. The results were jaw-dropping. The people who performed the worst, the bottom 25%, didn't just overrate themselves. They believed they had outperformed most of their peers. In reality, they were nowhere close. Meanwhile, those who performed best, they often underrated themselves, assuming others had done just as well or better. As Dunning pointed out, the real danger of incompetence is that it hides itself. The less you know, the harder it is to realize how little you know. Why? Because the exact skills required to do something well are the same ones you need to recognize whether you're doing it poorly. This creates a cruel double bind. Not only do people struggle to perform, they also lack the self-awareness to realize they're struggling at all. At the heart of the Dunning-Kruger effect is a flaw in our metacognition, our ability to reflect on our own thinking and judgment. When that system breaks down, it creates a kind of mental illusion, one where incompetence disguises itself as confidence. And once that illusion takes hold, it becomes shockingly resistant to correction. Why is this effect so persistent? Because it's fueled by several psychological forces working together. First, the unknown unknowns trap. When we step into a new area of knowledge, we often don't even know what we're missing. It's not just that we lack expertise, it's that we don't even know what expertise looks like. We don't know what questions to ask. We don't know where the gaps are. We're blind to our own blindness. Dunning explained it perfectly. The skills needed to generate a correct answer are the same ones needed to identify one. So if you don't have those skills, you're flying blind without even knowing you're in the air. Second, confirmation bias. Once we form an opinion about our own ability, we instinctively defend it. We look for proof we're right, and we ignore anything that might suggest otherwise. Someone who thinks they're skilled will remember their small victories, blame failures on bad luck or other people, twist vague or mix feedback into praise. They don't mean to deceive. Their brain is just doing what brains do, protecting the ego. Third, faulty self-calibration. Humans are notoriously bad at judging themselves in isolation. Without clear benchmarks or honest feedback, we tend to rate ourselves as better than average, a phenomenon known as illusory superiority. In other words, we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, and then some. Philosopher Bertrand Russell nailed this when he said, "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts." And that's the bitter truth the Dunning-Kruger effect reveals. The more confident someone is, the less they might actually know. And the people with the deepest understanding? Often the most careful, the most cautious, because they've seen the complexity for what it is. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just a straight line from dumb to smart. It's more like a curve, a psychological roller coaster from ignorance to insight. Let's walk that path. It all starts at the first peak, a place jokingly called Mount Stupid. This is where someone learns just enough to sound informed and feels like they know it all. But they're blind to the mountain range that stretches beyond the fog. As author Mark Twain once said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." After that initial high point of overconfidence, often called Mount Stupid, reality hits hard. As people start digging deeper into a subject, they begin to understand just how vast and complex it really is. Confidence plunges into what's known as the Valley of Despair. This is the moment when many quit, overwhelmed by the gap between what they thought they knew and what they've just realized they don't. But for those who persist, who keep learning, practicing, and pushing through, something remarkable happens. They begin the slow, steady climb up what psychologists call the slope of enlightenment. Over time, real competence grows, and with it, confidence, this time rightly earned. Eventually, they reach a place called the plateau of sustainability, where their skill is matched by appropriately measured self-belief. Ironically, the people who know the most often doubt themselves the most. Experts tend to underestimate their capabilities. Why? Because the deeper you go into a field, the more complexity you see, and the more aware you become of what you don't yet know. This humility isn't weakness, it's wisdom. As physicist Richard Feynman famously said, "I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that might be wrong." This grounded humility, the ability to say, "I might be wrong," is one of the most defining traits of true expertise. And it stands in stark contrast to the loud, misplaced certainty of beginners. Although the Dunning-Kruger effect was first demonstrated in controlled lab experiments, measuring grammar, logic, and humor, it spills over into nearly every area of life. In the workplace, it shows up as the confident but clueless colleague, the one who consistently overrates their contribution and performance. In fact, one survey revealed that 95% of managers believed they were better than average. Mathematically impossible but psychologically telling. This inflated self-image can stall career growth, block learning, and strain relationships with others. In medicine, the consequences can be even more serious, even fatal. Medical students at the bottom of their class have been shown to overestimate their abilities, putting patients at risk. Interestingly, studies also found that the most confident doctors weren't more accurate. They were just less likely to double-check their conclusions or ask for second opinions. And in politics, it's everywhere. People with shallow knowledge on complex issues like economics, climate change, or foreign policy often speak with the most certainty. Meanwhile, actual experts, those who've spent years studying these problems, tend to acknowledge nuance, uncertainty, and complexity. The modern internet has only supercharged the Dunning-Kruger effect. With just a few Google searches or a viral video, anyone can feel like an expert. Social media gives a microphone to everyone, regardless of experience or credentials. And while that democratization of voice can be powerful, it also levels the playing field between true experts and total novices, creating what some researchers now call an expertise crisis. As astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson once put it, one of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough to realize you're wrong. That single quote perfectly captures the Dunning-Kruger effect in action, not just in classrooms or labs, but across society at large. Because this isn't just a psychological quirk, it shapes conversations, fuels debates, and even influences global decision-making. Interestingly, the Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't manifest the same way everywhere. Culture plays a huge role in how people judge their own competence and how likely they are to fall into this trap. In the West, especially in American culture, confidence is treated as a virtue. From a young age, kids are taught to believe in themselves, to dream big, and to chase success with unwavering self-assurance. While empowering in many ways, this mindset can sometimes inflate self-perception, pushing people to overrate their abilities regardless of actual performance. The cultural ideal of the self-made individual, the one who pushes through the no matter what, can unintentionally magnify the Dunning-Kruger effect. It nurtures self-esteem, but sometimes at the expense of self-awareness. Now contrast that with many East Asian societies, where the values tilt toward humility, self-discipline, and knowing your limits. In countries like Japan, for example, students often underrate themselves, reporting lower self-assessments even when their skills are objectively strong. This is the reverse of the above-average effect often seen in the West, and it may actually serve as a natural defense against the Dunning-Kruger phenomenon. Another key cultural factor is the balance between individualism and collectivism. In collectivist cultures, where community, harmony, and group consensus are prioritized, people are often more open to feedback and more cautious about self-promotion. This makes them less likely to develop inflated egos because they're constantly checking themselves against group standards and values. As Confucius once said, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Some cultures take that wisdom seriously, building it into their education systems and social norms. But let's be clear, no culture is immune. The underlying flaw behind the Dunning-Kruger effect, the fact that we don't know what we don't know, is universal. It may look different from one place to another, but the bias is rooted in how human cognition works. Now, all this talk of overconfidence might make it sound like confidence itself is a bad thing. But that's not the case. In fact, a healthy level of confidence is crucial for growth, resilience, and success. Believing in yourself helps you push forward, take risks, and bounce back from failure. The problem only arises when that confidence is wildly out of sync with actual skill. When people think they're far better than they are, that's when mistakes happen. Decisions get worse, learning shuts down, and relationships suffer. But when confidence is grounded, aligned with real ability, it becomes one of the most powerful tools we have. Studies in performance psychology back this up. The highest achievers tend to operate in what researchers call the sweet spot. They believe in themselves just enough to act, but not so much that they ignore their weaknesses or stop improving. A little self-belief fuels action. Too much of it blinds us. And the goal is balance. A realistic self-image that grows as we grow. A touch of overconfidence isn't always a bad thing. In fact, research suggests that slightly overestimating your own ability, just by a small amount, can be helpful. This gentle self-delusion can spark motivation, push you through early failures, and keep you going when the path gets tough. But there's a sharp difference between that kind of productive optimism and the wild overestimation we see in the Dunning-Kruger effect. It comes down to intention and accuracy. A healthy dose of self-belief can give you momentum, but believing you're far more skilled than you are, that's where things spiral. Psychologist Albert Bandura, a pioneer in the study of self-efficacy, once said that people with strong self-belief don't dwell on failure. They focus on how to solve the problem. They ask, "What's next?" instead of "What went wrong?" That's a resilient confidence, one built on growth and problem-solving, not the hollow certainty of someone locked in the Dunning-Kruger trap. So the goal isn't to strip away confidence altogether. The goal is to shape a realistic, balanced form of confidence, one that's supported by skill and tempered by something called epistemic humility. That's a fancy term for a simple but powerful idea. Know what you know, and know what you don't. It's a mindset that lets you move forward boldly while staying honest about your limits. But here's the real challenge: spotting the Dunning-Kruger effect in yourself. By design, this bias hides itself. It convinces us that we're better than we are, and then convinces us we're right to think so. To break free, the first step is admitting that we're all vulnerable to it. No amount of education, intelligence, or success makes you immune. Everyone, even experts, can overestimate in areas where they're not truly skilled. As author and neuroscientist Robert Burton put it, the feeling of knowing is not a reliable guide to whether or not you actually know something. So how do we avoid falling into this trap? It starts with seeking feedback, not from just anyone, but from those who genuinely understand the subject. External perspectives reveal what self-assessment often cannot. But that means being open, really open. Not just to praise, but to criticism, and not with defensiveness, but curiosity. Next comes deliberate, targeted practice. Not just doing more of what you're already good at, but focusing intently on your weak spots, and pairing that with immediate, honest feedback so you can course correct in real time. Without that feedback loop, you risk reinforcing your blind spots instead of fixing them. Another key tool is metacognition, basically thinking about your own thinking. It means stepping back and asking yourself, do I really understand this? What might I be missing? Have I heard all sides? This self-reflective muscle helps you question what feels obvious, and that's essential. Socrates once said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." That kind of humility is rare, but vital, especially today. We live in a world that rewards quick answers and confident opinions. The person who speaks the loudest is often the one who gets heard, even if they're wrong. To resist that pressure takes something deeper: intellectual courage, the strength to say, "I don't know," and mean it, to pause instead of react, to ask more questions instead of jumping to conclusions. That's not a weakness, that's maturity. In democratic societies, the Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just affect individuals, it influences elections. When voters who lack deep understanding of complex policies make confident judgments based on shallow information, they often support oversimplified solutions to deeply layered problems. It also makes them more susceptible to populist rhetoric, bold claims that promise certainty without delivering real substance. This same effect plays out in the workplace. Sometimes, the most confident person in the room isn't the most capable, just the most vocal. When companies promote based on charisma over competence, they risk falling into what researchers call a confidence cascade, a culture where boldness is rewarded over results. Over time, entire organizations can become dominated by appearances rather than actual skill or performance. In public health and science, the consequences can be even more alarming. During the COVID-19 pandemic, countless confident individuals, armed with limited knowledge and a few Google searches, loudly challenged expert guidance. The result? Widespread confusion, distrust in science, and resistance to life-saving information, all because unqualified voices were mistaken for authority. The education system hasn't been spared either. Parents and students, despite lacking formal training, sometimes push strongly for instructional methods that conflict with well-established, research-based practices. This not only undermines teaching effectiveness, it weakens trust in professionals trained to guide learning. Philosopher Hannah Arendt once said, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists." And while we're not talking about extremism here, the erosion of epistemic authority, the trust in those who actually know what they're talking about, opens the door to similar dangers in modern democratic life. So how do we push back? It starts at two levels. Individually, by building metacognitive skills, the ability to reflect on how much we truly know and don't. Institutionally, by creating systems that reward substance over style, humility over hubris, and proven skill over performative confidence. Ultimately, the Dunning-Kruger effect reveals a deep paradox about human knowledge. The more you truly understand, the more aware you become of what remains unknown. As your knowledge expands, so does your awareness of your limits. This is why those who reach real expertise often speak in terms of complexity, nuance, and caution, not certainty. True mastery isn't about knowing everything, it's about being at peace with what you don't know. Recognizing the Dunning-Kruger effect gives us more than just insight. It offers a mirror. It reminds us that the road to real wisdom begins with humility, and that growth depends on embracing uncertainty, not denying it. And perhaps most importantly, it challenges us to strike a rare balance, to have enough confidence to take action, but also enough humility to keep learning. If you've made it this far, here's what I want you to do. First, drop a comment that says, "Today I admit I don't know everything, and that's okay." Then, if this hit home for you, give it a like, hit subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. I'll see you tomorrow. Until then, stay curious and stay humble.